My son Julian spoke the words that would ignite the slow-burning fuse of my life. He said them on a Thursday afternoon, the air in my kitchen thick with the scent of brewing coffee and the comfortable silence of a shared lifetime. He stirred his cup, the silver spoon clinking softly against the ceramic, a sound I had known since he was a boy too small to see over the counter. "Mom," he said, his voice a placid stream over treacherous rocks, "starting with your next paycheck, we are going to transfer all of your money into my account." He did not look up. He continued to stir his coffee, a perfect, lazy whirlpool in the dark liquid, as if he had just commented on the weather, as if he were proposing a convenience, a kindness, as if, at 62 years of age, after a lifetime of balancing budgets on a razor's edge, I had suddenly become incapable of managing my own affairs. I said nothing. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the rhythmic clinking of his spoon. My own breath was a stone in my chest. I watched his face, searching for a flicker of doubt, a hint of shame, something to explain how the child I had raised alone, the boy whose every need I had placed before my own, could look at me and see not a mother, but an asset to be managed. There was nothing. His expression was one of serene confidence, the unshakable certainty of a man who believes he is doing the right thing, the only thing. It was the face of someone who had already won a debate I did not even know we were having. So I took a slow, deep breath, a conscious effort to pull oxygen into lungs that felt like collapsing voids, and then I heard my own voice, a stranger's voice, calm and even. I told him yes. I told him that sounded fine. I told him that I trusted him. Julian's smile, when it finally came, was a slow dawn on his handsome face. It was a smile of relief, of victory. He stood, leaned over the small kitchen table, and pressed a kiss to my forehead. It was a dry, mechanical gesture, a punctuation mark at the end of a successful transaction. "It's for the best, Mom," he said, his hand patting my shoulder with a finality that chilled me to the bone. "You won't have to worry about a thing. I'll handle everything. It's for your own good. For my own good." The words hung in the air long after the sound of his car faded down the street, echoes in a house that suddenly felt cavernous and cold. I sat there, in my worn kitchen chair, until the afternoon sun bled into the soft gray of twilight. The next evening was Friday, and like every Friday for the past 3 years, Julian returned. He did not come alone. His wife, Chloe, was with him, her presence a silent, polished critique of my humble home. They came expecting what they always expected, a hot meal on the table, a welcoming home, a free dinner to kick off their weekend. I heard the key in the lock, the key I had given him, a symbol of trust he now wore like a trophy. I heard the door swing open. And then I heard the scream. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated shock. A high, piercing sound of disbelief that shattered the quiet of the evening. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality, imploding in an instant. I remained seated at my kitchen table, a solitary queen on a wooden throne, in a house stripped bare. I did not move. I did not rush to the door to see the source of the commotion. I already knew. I had orchestrated it. Julian burst into the kitchen, his face a mask of pale confusion, his eyes wide with a frantic energy. Chloe followed, her perfectly composed features undone by bewilderment. "Mom," Julian yelled, his voice cracking. "Mom, what did you do? Where is everything? The furniture, the television, the paintings, where did it all go?" I met his gaze with a calmness that felt ancient, a stillness I had summoned from the deepest parts of my soul. "I sold a few things," I said, my voice soft as falling ash. "I needed the money. After all, if you are going to be managing my finances, I thought it best to have a little cash on hand first." His face contorted, the pale shock blooming into a dark, mottled red of pure fury. He took a step toward me, and in that moment, the veil lifted. I saw my son not as the boy I had raised, not as the man I had sacrificed everything for, but as a stranger. A stranger looking at me with a terrifying mixture of contempt and rage, an expression that bordered on hatred. "Are you insane?" he hissed, the words tight and venomous. "Completely insane? How could you sell everything without consulting me? What are we supposed to do now when we visit? How are we supposed to be comfortable here?" And there it was. The sentence that broke the final, fragile thread of my denial. How are we supposed to be comfortable here? Not, how are you going to be comfortable, Mom? Not, are you all right? His concern was not for my well-being, but for the loss of his convenient Friday night sanctuary. My home, my things, existed only for his comfort, his benefit. Chloe stepped forward then. Her eyes, which I had always found cold, now looked like chips of ice. She said a word I would never forget. Selfish. She called me selfish. That you could be so selfish, Patricia, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. We come here every week to keep you company, to make sure you're not lonely, and this is how you repay us? Selfish. The word ricocheted around the empty rooms. A cruel joke. Me. The woman who worked double shifts for 2 decades so Julian could have a life I never did. The woman who had given up any chance of a new relationship after his father left, terrified that a stepfather might not love my son as I did. The woman who had worn shoes until the soles wore through, who had eaten rice and beans for weeks on end to afford the brand-name sneakers he craved, just so he wouldn't feel less than the other children. Selfish. Julian just stood there, his jaw tight, looking at me as if I were a complex problem that needed to be solved, an obstacle to his peace. And then he delivered the final blow, the words that cleaved my heart in two. Maybe I was wrong to suggest the bank account thing, he said, his voice dangerously low. Maybe you're not in a position to be making sound decisions anymore. Maybe you need more help than I realized. More help. The words were a euphemism, a thinly veiled threat. He was not talking about help. He was talking about control. He was talking about declaring me incompetent. I rose from my chair, the movement slow and deliberate. I looked at them both, these two strangers in my empty home. Dinner isn't ready, I said, my voice resonating with a strength I did not know I possessed. There is no dinner. If you're hungry, I suggest you find a restaurant. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Julian stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Chloe let out a short, bitter laugh. Respect, she muttered under her breath. Some people have no gratitude. And then Julian spoke again, his voice now devoid of all warmth, a chilling, flat monotone. You should be careful, Mom. A woman your age, all alone, with no family who truly cares about her, you could end up in a very bad place. He was the only thing I had. I should remember that before I did something foolish. They left then, storming out of my house, the slam of the front door, a final violent punctuation. I heard their car engine roar to life, the squeal of tires on pavement as they sped away, and I stood there, in the echoing silence of my kitchen, and I felt something inside me shatter. But it wasn't sadness that filled the cracks. It wasn't despair. It was clarity. A terrifying, liberating clarity. It was the absolute, unshakable certainty that my son did not love me. Perhaps he never had. I was not a person to him. I was a resource, a provider of food, shelter, and money. A utility to be used until it ran dry. I sank back into my chair and looked at the bare walls, the ghost outlines on the floor where my furniture had once stood. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I smiled. A true, genuine smile, because Julian didn't know the most important thing. He didn't know that I hadn't sold the furniture because I needed the money. I had sold it to send a message, to test a theory, to confirm the terrible suspicion that had been growing in my heart for years. And his reaction had been my confirmation, printed in bold, undeniable letters. He had revealed his true nature. That night, sitting in the darkness, I made a decision. I would not scream. I would not cry. I would not beg for the love of a son who saw me as a bank account. I would be quiet. I would be patient. I would let him believe he had the upper hand. And then, when he was at his most confident, when he was most certain of his control, I would show him, and the world, who Eleanor Vance truly was. Not the submissive, sacrificial mother he thought he knew, but the woman who had survived a broken marriage, crushing poverty, and a lifetime of hard labor. The woman who knew exactly how to fight. The woman he should never, ever have underestimated. There was a time, a long time, when I believed that motherhood was its own reward. A sacred pact where the love you poured out would be returned in equal measure. A fundamental law of the universe. I believed that every sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of an unbreakable bond between my son and me. I could not have been more wrong. Julian was born 34 years ago, on a night when the sky wept and the wind howled like a grieving animal. His father, a man of charming words and fleeting promises, vanished when Julian was barely 2 years old. He said he was not ready for the weight of fatherhood, that he needed to find himself. He said I would understand one day. I never did. But I did not waste my years waiting for a ghost to return. I was alone, with a small child whose world depended on me, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with rent that consumed most of my meager paycheck as a secretary, $800 a month. It was an impossible sum to live on, a constant state of financial suffocation. So, I took a second job. At night, when the city slept, I cleaned office buildings. I would leave Julian with Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor, a woman whose kindness was a small island of solace in my turbulent life. She charged me $50 a week, a sum that felt like a fortune, but her care was priceless. My days became a blur of relentless motion. I worked at the law firm from 7 in the morning until 6 in the evening. I would race home, cook dinner for Julian, bathe him, read him a story, and tuck him into bed, his small hand clutching mine. And then, at 9 o'clock, my second day would begin. I would travel across town to clean cold, empty buildings until 2 in the morning. I survived on 4 hours of sleep a night. I did this for years. So many years that they blended into one long, exhausting decade. I remember when Julian was 10, he wanted a specific pair of sneakers, the ones all the other boys wore, with the swoosh that promised speed and status. They cost $120. My combined income was $1,200 a month. $120 was nearly our entire grocery budget for 2 weeks. But I saw the longing in his eyes, the deep-seated fear of being different, of being the poor kid. I could not bear it. I wanted him to know that his mother would move heaven and earth for him, so I bought the sneakers, and for the entire next month, I ate rice with a little bit of soy sauce for lunch and dinner. Julian never knew. He just knew he had the best sneakers in his class. When he turned 18, he set his sights on a private university, a place with ivy-covered walls and a tuition of $15,000 a year. I did not have that kind of money. I did not have a fraction of it. My savings account was a barren wasteland. But I walked into the bank, my hands trembling, and signed the loan documents. I mortgaged my future for his. For 4 years, I carried the weight of that debt, and for 10 years after he graduated, I continued to pay it off, every single month, a constant reminder of my sacrifice. He graduated with honors, landing a good job in finance. He was earning $3,000 a month, more than double what I made after 30 years of relentless work. And I was happy, genuinely, profoundly happy. I believed I had done it. I had broken the cycle. I had given my son the life I never had. My work as a mother was complete. But Julian did not move out. He said he wanted to save money, to build a solid foundation before venturing out on his own. I, of course, agreed. My home was his home. He could stay as long as he needed. He stayed for 5 more years. 5 years during which I continued to work my 2 jobs. 5 years during which I paid the rent, the utilities, and bought all the food. 5 years during which Julian saved every single penny of his substantial salary, living a life entirely free of financial responsibility. When he finally left, it was not to rent his own place. It was to buy a house. A $200,000 house, which he paid for in cash, the cash he had accumulated by living off of me. I told him how proud I was. And I was. I truly believed I had done the right thing, that my continued sacrifice had been a wise investment in his future. I thought, perhaps now, he might help me. Maybe I could finally quit my night job. Maybe I could rest. But the offer never came. 2 years later, Julian married Chloe. She was an elegant woman, impeccably dressed, with perfectly manicured nails and a voice that was both polite and dismissive. From our first meeting, I felt her judgment. She looked at me as if I were a curious artifact from a past she could not comprehend, a relic of a life of struggle that her husband had somehow escaped. Their wedding was a lavish $30,000 affair. I was seated at a table in the back, far from the head table where the important family members were supposed to sit. Julian explained that those tables were for his boss and important clients. I nodded and smiled. I said I understood. I danced when I was asked to dance. And I went home alone that night to my small apartment, a hollow ache in my chest that had nothing to do with fatigue. After the wedding, his visits dwindled, from twice a week to once every 2 weeks. Then once a month. He was always rushed, his eyes constantly glancing at his phone, a litany of excuses for why he had to leave early. I never complained. I did not want to be that mother, the clinging, demanding mother who did not understand that her son had his own life. Then came the Friday night dinners. They started spontaneously. He and Chloe would arrive, always around dinner time, always unannounced, and always with the expectation of a waiting meal. At first, I was overjoyed. I thought he missed me, that he wanted to reconnect. I would cook his favorite meals, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, spaghetti bolognese from scratch. I would set the table with my best dishes. I would buy expensive desserts. But I started to notice a pattern. They never came just to talk. They came to eat. They would arrive, sit, eat, and leave, often within an hour. They never brought anything. Not a bottle of wine, not a dessert, not even a small contribution for the groceries. One night, after they had gone, I calculated the cost of the meal, $45. $45 I did not have to spare. $45 that represented 3 extra hours of scrubbing floors in a cold, empty office building. And in that moment, a painful realization settled upon me. I was not his mother anymore. I was a service, a free restaurant, a convenience. Other things started to become clear. When I asked for help, he was always too busy. When my old car broke down and I needed a ride to a doctor's appointment, he had an important meeting he could not miss. When I mentioned that my refrigerator was making a strange noise and I was afraid it would die, he told me I should just buy a new one, as if I had $500 tucked away for emergencies. I barely had enough to make it to the end of the month. The deepest cut came on my 60th birthday. He arrived 2 hours late, blaming traffic. He came empty-handed, no gift, no card. He stayed for 20 minutes, ate a slice of the small cake I had bought for myself, and left. That night I cried. I cried for the first time in years, a torrent of grief for the son I had lost, or perhaps the son I had never truly had. I finally understood what I had been refusing to see. To Julian, I was no longer a person. I was a resource, an object that existed for his use, to be accessed when needed and forgotten otherwise. And the most painful part was that I had allowed it. I had created this dynamic. I had never asked for anything in return for my sacrifices. I had never voiced my hurt or my needs. I was terrified that if I did, if I became an inconvenience, he would vanish from my life completely. And the thought of losing him, even this hollow version of him, was more terrifying than anything. So I continued to play my part, the convenient mother, the silent mother, the mother who was always there. Until that Thursday afternoon, when he demanded control of my money, and something deep inside me, a part of me that had been dormant for decades, finally woke up. A small, clear voice whispered that this was not love. This was an acquisition. This was the beginning of the end. But even then, with that voice screaming in my head, I told him yes, because a foolish, stubborn part of me still clung to hope. The hope that I was wrong. The hope that my son, my only child, truly did love me. The hope that he would protect me. It was a hope that was about to be brutally and finally extinguished. The following Monday, Julian arrived at my door carrying a leather briefcase. He spread a sheaf of papers across my kitchen table with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned executive. His smile was different now. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cool, calculating precision. "It's simple, Mom," he said, his voice brisk. "I just need you to sign here, here, and here." He pointed with a gold pen. "These are just the standard forms to grant me access to your account, to set up the automatic transfer of your paycheck each month. It's all standard." I looked at the papers. They were dense with legal jargon, a forest of fine print designed to be impenetrable. But I had worked for lawyers for 30 years. I knew how to read the language of deception. I scanned the paragraphs, my eyes searching for the hidden teeth in the seemingly benign agreement. And then I found them. The words that sent a chill down my spine. It was not just access. It was a full power of attorney over my financial affairs. The authority to make transfers, to open and close accounts, to take out loans, to make any and all financial decisions on my behalf, without my consent. "Julian," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "this document says you would have total and complete control over my money." He nodded. not missing a beat. Yes, Mom, it's more efficient that way. It streamlines the process. I can manage everything without having to bother you for authorization every time. It's for practicality. Practicality. The word echoed in the quiet kitchen. Practical for whom? I wondered. But I did not say it aloud. I picked up the pen he offered. It felt heavy in my hand, a tool of my own undoing. For a moment, a lifetime of conditioning, of trusting him, of putting his needs first, almost won. I almost signed. I almost surrendered everything. But then, the image of his face from Friday night flashed in my mind, the face of pure rage when he saw the empty house. I remembered his words, the veiled threat hanging in the air. I remembered his wife's sneer, the word selfish still ringing in my ears. I placed the pen back down on the table, next to the unsigned papers. You know, Julian, I said, my gaze steady on his. Give me a few days to think this over. I want to read everything carefully. I want to be sure. For a split second, his mask slipped. A flash of pure irritation crossed his features before it was quickly replaced by his patient, understanding smile. Of course, Mom. There's nothing to think about, it's all very straightforward. But fine, take a few days if you need to. He left the papers on the table, a silent testament to his confidence that I would eventually capitulate. He assumed, as he always had, that my resistance was temporary. That night, sleep was a distant country I could not reach. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at those papers, and the small voice of warning inside me had become a deafening roar. This was not for my own good. This was a cage, and he was handing me the key to lock myself inside. The next morning I went to the bank. It was early, the air still crisp with the promise of a new day. I asked the teller, a young woman with kind eyes named Sarah, to print out my transaction history for the past 6 months. She handed me a stack of papers several pages long. I sat in the waiting area and went through them, line by line, my heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. And then I saw it. A withdrawal that I had not made. A single transaction from 3 months ago, $1,200. A sum that would have left my account nearly empty. $1,200 that had simply vanished. I walked back to Sarah's counter, the papers trembling in my hand. I asked her if she could provide any more details about that specific withdrawal. She typed into her computer, her brow furrowed in concentration. She told me the withdrawal had been made with my debit card at a branch on the other side of town. A branch I had never, in my entire life, set foot in, but my card was in my wallet. It had always been in my wallet, except for one time. The memory surfaced, sharp and sickening. 3 months ago, Julian had come to visit unexpectedly. I had been in the shower when he arrived. I had called out for him to come in, that the door was unlocked. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel, he was sitting on the sofa in the living room. My purse had been on the small table next to him. We had talked for a while. I had gone into the kitchen to make us coffee. I had left him alone in the living room with my purse for at least 10 minutes. A wave of nausea washed over me. It could only mean one thing. My son had taken my debit card from my purse. He had gone to an ATM. He had taken my money. He must have known my PIN. I had used the same one for years, his birthday. I felt the world tilt on its axis. I asked Sarah if there was any way to be certain. She explained that I would need to file a formal fraud claim, that the bank would investigate, that it could take weeks. I told her I would think about it. I left the bank feeling as if I were floating outside my own body, but I did not file the claim. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to know the full extent of the betrayal. The next few days were a descent into a nightmare of my own making. I tore my apartment apart, searching through old boxes, through every file and every statement I had ever saved. And I found more. I found that 2 years ago, when I had been hospitalized with a severe case of pneumonia, someone had used my health insurance to pay for a series of specialist consultations I had never attended, at clinics I had never heard of. Consultations that had exhausted my annual coverage, which was why I had been forced to pay out of pocket for my expensive medications that year. And then I found the letter. A letter from a credit card company I did not recognize, welcoming me as a new cardholder. A card in my name, with a current balance of $3,000. $3,000 in purchases I had never made, at stores I had never visited. I called the number on the letter, my voice a strained whisper. I asked when the account had been opened. 18 months ago, the representative told me. I asked for a list of the recent purchases. Hardware stores, electronics stores, high-end furniture stores. Julian had bought his house 2 years ago. Julian had renovated that house. And Julian, it seemed, had used my good credit to help finance it. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by a sea of paper, and the entire foundation of my life crumbled into dust. It was not just about the money. It was the calculated, systematic nature of the deception, the years of lies, the cold-blooded exploitation. He had looked me in the eye, day after day, week after week, all while he was robbing me blind. He had watched me struggle, watched me work myself to the bone, knowing he was the one making my life harder. I cried then. I cried until my body ached and no more tears would come. And then I wiped my face. I gathered every single piece of paper, every statement, every bill, and I made another decision. I would not confront him, not yet, because I knew what he would do. He would deny everything. He would twist my words. He would call me confused, senile. He would use my age and my grief against me until I began to doubt my own sanity. No, I would be smarter than that. I would be methodical. I would build a case so solid, so irrefutable, that even he could not deny it. And then, and only then, would I act. That Friday, Julian and Chloe arrived as usual, at precisely 7 o'clock, their faces masks of strained politeness. I had cooked his favorite meal, the one I used to make for him as a child when he came home from school with a scraped knee or a heavy heart, chicken cacciatore. A dish that was supposed to say I love you without words. They sat at my table. They ate my food. They spoke of trivial things, a new movie, office politics, the weather. I watched them, but I was not really seeing them. I was seeing specters, illusions of the people I thought they were. And I realized that Julian ate my food with the same casual indifference he would a fast food burger. There was no joy in it, no gratitude, only the mechanical act of consumption. When they finished, he slid the bank papers across the table again, placing them next to his empty plate. The days you asked for have passed, Mom. You've had time to think. Let's get this signed. I looked him directly in the eye, my gaze unwavering. I'm still not sure, Julian, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. I need more time. Chloe scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. Patricia, this is absurd. Lawrence is only trying to help you. I don't understand why you're being so distrustful. Distrustful. She had no idea. Lawrence stood up then, his patience finally gone. The mask of the caring son fell away completely, revealing the cold, hard face of a predator. Mom, this is for your own good, he snapped. You're clearly not capable of managing your finances alone anymore. Look at the irrational decisions you're making, selling all the furniture. Irrational. Selling my own things was irrational. But years of systematic theft was just practicality. I held his gaze until he, the one with all the power and confidence, looked away first. They left that night without another word. And I remained seated in my kitchen, the unsigned papers, a declaration of war on my table. A silent war. A war for my dignity, my autonomy, my life. A war I was now determined to win. The days that followed were wrapped in a strange, heavy silence. Julian did not call. He did not visit. It was a punishment, I knew. He was using his absence as a weapon, believing that the silence and the loneliness would break me. He expected me to call, to apologize, to beg him to come back, to finally sign those papers as an act of surrender, but I did not break. For the first time in years, the silence in my home did not feel like emptiness. It felt like space. Space to think, to breathe, to plan. I spent those days meticulously untangling the web of deceit he had woven through my financial life. Every receipt, every statement, every piece of paper became a clue. And the more I looked, the more I found. I discovered that 3 years ago, Julian had asked to borrow my driver's license. He claimed he had lost his wallet and needed a valid ID to pick up an urgent package for work. I had given it to him without a second thought, but he had done more than pick up a package. He had used my information to open an electricity account in my name, for an address that was not mine. It was the address of his new house. For 3 years, the power bill for his home had been legally tied to my name. And when he made late payments, the penalties had attached themselves to my credit history like silent parasites. That was why my application for a small car repair loan had been denied last year. That was why my credit score, which I had guarded so carefully my whole life, had mysteriously plummeted. I called the electric company. I explained the situation, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost paralyzing. The woman on the other end of the line was sympathetic but firm. I needed to file a sworn affidavit. I needed to report it as identity fraud. Identity fraud, committed by my own son. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, trying to process the sheer scale of the betrayal. At what point had he become this person? At what point had my son become a criminal? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought of all the times I had made excuses for him. All the times I had told myself he was just busy, that he had his own life, that I was being unreasonable to expect more. But this was not about expecting more. This was about theft. This was about a son who viewed his mother not as a person to be loved, but as an identity to be exploited. The next morning I did something I had never done before. I made an appointment with a lawyer. His name was William Sanchez, a small independent attorney whose ad I had seen in the local paper offering free consultations. I walked into his modest office feeling small and foolish, a 62-year-old woman about to report her own child. But Mr. Sanchez, a kind-faced man in his 50s with gentle eyes, listened without judgment. He let me speak for nearly an hour. I told him everything. The missing money, the fraudulent credit card, the electricity account, the power of attorney documents. He took notes, his expression growing more grave with each revelation. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice soft but firm, "what you are describing is a pattern of calculated financial elder abuse. It is a serious crime. If you sign those papers your son is pushing, you will be legally handing him the keys to your entire life. He could liquidate everything you own, and you would have no legal recourse because you will have given him permission." The words landed like stones in my stomach. I knew he was right, but hearing it from a legal professional made it terrifyingly real. "What can I do?" I whispered. He leaned forward, his gaze direct. "First, you do not sign anything. Second, you must report the credit card fraud and the unauthorized withdrawals to the bank and the police. Third, you need to change every password, every PIN, every piece of security information you have. And fourth, you should seriously consider a restraining order if you feel he might become aggressive." A restraining order against my own son. The thought was monstrous, a violation of the natural order of things. "I don't want to get him into legal trouble," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's my son." Mr. Sanchez's eyes were filled with a sad compassion. "Mrs. Vance, your son is already in legal trouble. He has committed multiple felonies. The question is not whether you want to get him in trouble. The question is whether you want to protect yourself from further harm." I left his office with a folder full of forms and a clear, terrifying path forward. I felt overwhelmed, but for the first time, I also felt a spark of something else: determination. I went directly to a new bank, a different one from where I had my main accounts. I opened a new savings account that only I knew about. I changed my direct deposit for my paycheck. I then went to my old bank and changed all my passwords and PINs. I reported the fraudulent credit card and filed a formal dispute. The bank teller who helped me was patient and kind, guiding me through the process without an ounce of judgment. When I returned home that afternoon, I was exhausted, but I also felt lighter, as if I had shed a heavy, invisible cloak I had been wearing for years. That evening, Julian called. His voice on the phone was tense. "Mom, we need to talk. Come to my house for dinner tomorrow night. We need to sort this out." It was not an invitation. It was a summons. The old me would have obeyed instantly. But the new me, the me who had spent the day with a lawyer and fraud departments, felt only a cold resolve. "I can't tomorrow, Julian," I said. "I'm busy." "Busy?" His voice was incredulous. "Mom, what could you possibly be busy with? This is important. For you." "Maybe," I replied. "But for me, other things have become more important." There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You're acting very strangely, Mom. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you need to stop this stubbornness and sign those papers. It's for your own good." For my own good. Those 4 words again. the mantra of the manipulator. "Lawrence," I said, my voice as steady as steel, "I am not going to sign anything. And I think you and I need to have a very serious conversation about several things." "About what?" he asked, his tone suddenly cautious, wary. "About money that has disappeared from my bank account without my permission," I said, listing each offense like a prosecutor. "About credit cards that have been opened in my name that I never applied for. About utility accounts for addresses where I have never lived." The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear the frantic turning of the gears in his mind as he tried to formulate a response. I don't know what you're talking about," he finally stammered. "I think you do," I said softly. "And I think you need to think very carefully about what you say next. Mom, you're being delusional. You're getting confused. Maybe you need to see a doctor." There it was. The final, desperate card to play. The suggestion that I was losing my mind. "I am not confused, Julian," I said, my voice rising with a righteous anger I had suppressed for decades. "I have the papers, I have the bank statements, I have all the proof. And I have already spoken with a lawyer." Another silence, this one longer, heavier, charged with panic. "You spoke with a lawyer?" His voice was a bare whisper. "Yes. And he explained to me, in very clear terms, what you have been doing. He explained the legal definitions of fraud, of theft, of identity theft." "Mom, you can't be serious. I'm your son. Everything I've done has been to help you." "Help me? You stole from me. You used me. You lied to me." "I would never," he started, but I cut him off. "Yes, you did, and you know it. The only question now is what we are going to do about it." I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "I'm coming over," he said, his voice a low growl. "We need to talk about this in person." "No," I said, the single word a solid wall. "You are not coming to my home. If you want to talk, we can do it with my lawyer present." "You're insane," he shouted then, the facade of control completely shattered. "Absolutely insane. After everything I've done for you. All the times you came to eat for free, you mean? All the times you needed something? But what about the times I needed you, Julian? Where were you then?" I hung up the phone before he could answer, before his words could poison my resolve. I sat in my kitchen, the phone still in my hand, my body trembling, not with fear but with the raw, liberating power of a truth finally spoken. The war was no longer silent. It had just begun. The next morning I woke to a world that seemed sharper, the colors more vivid. A thick fog of denial and fear had lifted from my mind, and in its place was a clarity that was both painful and empowering. I knew what had to be done. There could be no turning back. After a simple breakfast of toast and tea, I took my purse and left the house with a clear agenda. My first stop was the main branch of my old bank, where I had kept a small savings account for over 30 years. It held $7,200, the meager remnants of a lifetime of work. I walked up to the bank manager's desk and asked her to close the account. She looked at me with concern, asking if there was a problem. I simply told her I was restructuring my finances. She handed me a cashier's check for the full amount. I took that check to the new bank on the other side of town, the one Julian knew nothing about, and deposited it into my new, secret account. It was the first step in building my fortress. From there, I went to the electricity company. Armed with the documents Mr. Sanchez had helped me prepare, I filed the identity fraud affidavit. The customer service representative reviewed my paperwork and assured me that an investigation would be launched immediately and that the fraudulent account would be removed from my name. With each official stamp, with each signature, I felt another invisible chain breaking. My next stop was the credit bureau. I requested a full, detailed report of my credit history. I sat in their sterile waiting room and read through the thick document, page by agonizing page. And there, buried in the data, was another betrayal. A personal loan for $5,000, taken out in my name 2 years prior. A loan that was now in collections, accruing interest and penalties daily, $5,000. The rage, which I thought had been spent, rose in my throat again like bile. With a steady hand, I used a highlighter to mark every fraudulent item. I filled out the dispute forms, my handwriting clear and firm. By the time I left that office, the afternoon sun was low in the sky. I had not eaten since breakfast, but I felt no hunger. I was fueled by something more potent: purpose. My final visit of the day was to my neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She was now 78 years old and had lived in the apartment next to mine for 40 years. We had been close friends once, but in recent years, my obsession with maintaining a relationship with Julian had caused me to neglect the other important people in my life. I knocked on her door, and she opened it with a look of pleasant surprise. "Eleanor, what a lovely surprise! Come in, come in." We sat in her cozy living room, surrounded by photographs of her children and grandchildren. She looked at me with her wise, kind eyes. "You look different, Eleanor," she said. "There's a new light in you." And so I told her. I told her everything. The whole sordid, painful story. She listened without interruption, her expression a mixture of sadness and quiet understanding. When I finished, she took my hand. Her skin was thin and cool, but her grip was strong. "I knew something was wrong, Eleanor," she said softly. "I saw the way he treated you. Like you were his servant, but it was not my place to say anything. I am so glad you are finally seeing the truth." "I need to ask you for a favor, Alice," I said. "I need you to be my witness. If Julian comes here, if he tries to tell people I'm confused or senile, I need someone to confirm that I am in full command of my faculties." "Of course, my dear," she said without hesitation. "And more than that, if you ever feel unsafe in your own home, my door is always open to you." Her words, so simple and sincere, filled me with a gratitude so profound it brought tears to my eyes. But I did not let them fall. I had cried enough. That evening, I organized all my documents into a large binder: the bank statements, the credit reports, the fraud affidavits, the notes from my meetings with Mr. Sanchez. I made copies of everything. I placed the originals in a fireproof box hidden in my closet and gave the binder of copies to Mrs. Gable for safekeeping, along with a sealed letter to be opened only in an emergency. I was preparing for battle. I knew Julian would not let this go. He would not simply accept defeat. He would come for me, armed with manipulation, with guilt, with threats. But the woman he would be facing was not the same woman he had known his whole life. That woman, the one who lived in fear and silent sacrifice, had died the night he threatened her in her own kitchen. The woman who stood in her place was someone new, someone stronger, someone he did not know at all. On Wednesday afternoon, the inevitable happened. I saw his expensive sedan pull up in front of my building. He and Chloe got out of the car, their movements stiff and determined. They were coming for a confrontation. I took a deep, steadying breath and waited. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent summons. Then again, and again. I opened the door but blocked the entrance with my body. "We need to talk," Julian said, his voice hard. "I'm listening," I replied. "Inside, Mom. We're not having this conversation in the hallway. We have nothing to talk about inside. Whatever you have to say, you can say it right here." Chloe scoffed. "This is ridiculous, Patricia. Stop acting like we're your enemies." "You are not my enemies," I said, my voice even and cold. "Enemies are honest about their intentions. You are far worse. You are thieves who pretended to be family." Julian's face flushed with anger. He took a step forward, his body crowding mine in the doorway. "How dare you? After everything I have done for you." "Everything you have done to me, you mean," I corrected him. "I have the records, Julian, the bank statements, the credit card bills. I know about the electricity account. I know about the loan. I know everything." He froze, his mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. The color drained from his face. "And now," I continued, my voice gaining in strength, "you have two choices. Option 1, you repay every single cent you have stolen from me, plus damages. Or Option 2, I walk into the police station with this binder of evidence, and I file formal criminal charges against you for fraud and identity theft." "You wouldn't," Chloe gasped. "He's your son." "That is precisely why this hurts so much," I said, looking past her to Julian. "Because you are my son, because I gave you my entire life, and you repaid me by bleeding me dry." Julian finally found his voice, and it was a voice I had never heard before, raw and filled with a lifetime of perceived injustice. "You owe me," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I grew up without a father because of you. I spent my whole childhood watching you struggle and be tired all the time. You chose to have me. You chose to raise me alone. I didn't ask to be born. His words were meant to be daggers, but they no longer pierced my heart. I saw them for what they were, the desperate justifications of a guilty man trying to shift the blame. "You are right," I said calmly. "I did choose to have you. And for most of my life, it was the best decision I ever made. But my choice to be your mother did not give you the right to steal from me. It did not give you the right to destroy my financial future for your own convenience. I didn't steal anything, I just took what I was owed. Nothing was owed to you, Julian. I gave you everything you needed as a child. As an adult, my obligation ended." "Let's go," Chloe said, pulling on his arm. "It's not worth it." "She's completely lost her mind." They turned and walked away without another word. I watched them go, and I closed the door, the click of the lock a sound of finality. A sound of freedom. Later that night, Mr. Sanchez called. He informed me that the banks had confirmed the fraud. The credit card debt would be erased. The unauthorized withdrawals were being investigated. He said I had a rock-solid case if I chose to press charges. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my empty living room, in a house without a television or comfortable chairs, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly rich. Rich in a currency that could not be stolen. Rich in dignity. Rich in strength. Rich in the certain knowledge that I was finally, after all these years, doing the right thing for myself. The silence from Julian in the following weeks was profound. It was no longer a punishment, but a consequence. And in that silence, I found myself doing something I rarely did. I looked at his social media profile. I felt I had a right to see the life he presented to the world, the life that had been built, in part, on my ruin. What I found was breathtaking in its audacity. The day after our confrontation at my door, he had posted a photo of himself and Chloe at a fancy restaurant, wine glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Celebrating the removal of toxic energy from our lives. Surround yourself only with those who add value." He had recast me as the villain, my refusal to be further victimized as an act of toxicity. The comments were a chorus of support from his friends, congratulating him on setting healthy boundaries. I stared at the screen, a cold disgust settling in my stomach. Day after day, he constructed a public narrative of a man wronged. A photo at the gym with a caption about investing in oneself. A photo of him working late at his desk with a post about the sacrifices required for success. Each post was a carefully crafted lie, a brick in the wall of his public deception. But the most stunning, most perverse post came on a Friday, the day he would normally have been at my house for dinner. He posted an old photograph of the two of us. I was holding him in my arms, a toddler with a wide, innocent smile. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. It spoke of the pain of being hurt by those you love most. It spoke of his difficult but necessary decision to distance himself from a toxic family relationship for his own mental health. He had not just stolen my money. He was now stealing my story, inverting it, twisting it into a weapon to be used against me. People I knew, former neighbors, old colleagues, filled his comments with sympathy and praise for his bravery. I watched this digital theater unfold in silence, knowing that any public response from me would only feed his narrative that I was unstable. But each post was a fresh wound. The final straw was a video tour he posted of his beautiful home. The new kitchen, the landscaped garden, the expensive furniture, all of it presented as the fruit of his hard work and dedication. He showed it off with such pride, as if he had truly earned it all himself, as if he had forgotten that the foundation of that house was built on my stolen credit, on my compromised future. I watched him, and I finally understood. My son was a man who lived in a parallel reality, a world of his own making where his theft was justified compensation, where his mother's refusal to be a victim was abuse. There was no reaching him, there was no conversation to be had. He had chosen his lie. He had chosen to be the hero of a story in which I was the monster. And in that moment, watching him smile for his phone's camera in his stolen house, I knew that whatever love I had left for him had finally, irrevocably, died. It was time to stop observing. It was time to act. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in Mr. Sanchez's office, reviewing the final compilation of evidence. The banks had completed their internal investigations. The total amount of fraudulent transactions, spanning 3 years, came to $17,000. The number itself was shocking, but it was the premeditation it represented that truly took my breath away. This was not a series of desperate mistakes. This was a long-term, systematic operation of theft against his own mother. Mr. Sanchez explained my options. We could proceed directly with filing criminal charges. Or, he suggested, we could first send a formal demand letter, a private communication, giving Julian one last chance to repay the money and avoid a public legal battle. It was, he said, a courtesy often extended in family matters. A part of me, the part that was still a mother, wanted to give him that one last chance. The irrational hope that, when faced with the undeniable black and white proof of his crimes, some flicker of conscience might ignite within him. But another part of me, a new, stronger part, knew better. I knew that Julian would not see a demand letter as an act of grace. He would see it as a sign of weakness. A confirmation that, in the end, I did not have the stomach to truly hold him accountable. He would use the time to hide assets, to prepare his own legal counterattack, to escalate his public campaign to discredit me. I looked at Mr. Sanchez, at the mountain of evidence on his desk, and I made my decision. I do not want to send a private letter, I said, my voice clear and steady. I want to file a formal civil lawsuit. I want this to be a matter of public record. I want the truth to be available for anyone to see, not just the filtered, self-serving version he posts on the internet. Mr. Sanchez nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. He told me he would file the paperwork immediately. Lawrence would be officially served within 72 hours. I walked out of that office feeling a sensation I had not felt in decades. It was the feeling of power. Not power over someone else, but the power of my own conviction. For the first time in my life, I had chosen to protect myself over protecting the reputation of my son. It was a painful choice, but it filled me with a sense of integrity that was more valuable than any amount of money. The legal notice was delivered to Julian's office on a Thursday morning. Less than 2 hours later, my phone began to ring. It rang and rang, an incessant, desperate plea. I let every call go to voicemail. I had nothing more to say to him. Later that night, I listened to the messages. It was a fascinating and disturbing study in a manipulator's panic. The first message was calm, controlled. "Mom, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We need to talk immediately." The second was more urgent, his voice strained. "Mom, please call me. This is going to ruin my life. You're destroying your own son." By the fifth message, all pretense was gone. He was screaming, his voice raw with rage and fear. "You will regret this. I have lawyers too. They will prove you are a senile old woman who doesn't know what she's doing." I listened to each message, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. His tactics no longer worked on me. He had no power here anymore. His response was predictable. He launched his own public relations counteroffensive, publishing a long, vague statement on his social media about being the victim of a tragic and unjust legal attack from a family member he loved dearly, but who was clearly suffering from age-related mental health issues. The wave of sympathy was immediate and overwhelming, but something had changed. His words were just words. I had documents. I had proof. I had the law on my side. The real turning point came when his own lawyers reviewed the evidence I had submitted to the court. Suddenly, his social media fell silent. Mr. Sanchez informed me that Julian's legal team had reached out to discuss the possibility of an out-of-court settlement. It was a tacit admission of guilt. They knew he could not win in a public trial. The whispers started in his social circles. Friends and neighbors, now aware of the public lawsuit, began to ask questions. The narrative of the successful self-made man began to unravel. Mrs. Gable told me the neighborhood was buzzing with the news. His carefully constructed world was beginning to fracture. The final settlement was reached 3 months later. The terms were non-negotiable. He was to repay the full $17,000, plus an additional $5,000 for damages and emotional distress. He was also responsible for all my legal fees and the costs of repairing my credit. The payments were structured over 6 months. A single missed payment would nullify the agreement and trigger the immediate filing of criminal charges. But there was one final clause, one that I had insisted upon. He had to issue a public statement on the same social media platforms where he had slandered me, acknowledging that he had committed financial misconduct and that the allegations in my lawsuit were true. He fought this clause harder than any other. It meant the complete and utter destruction of the public image he had so carefully cultivated. But in the end, he had no choice. The statement appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. It was brief, clearly written by his lawyers, but the words were there for all to see. An admission of accessing accounts without authorization. An admission of opening lines of credit using my information. A hollow apology for his serious errors in judgment. The comment section exploded. His former supporters expressed shock and betrayal. And I watched it all, not with a sense of victory or revenge, but with a quiet sense of closure. The truth was finally out. The first payment arrived in my new bank account on the scheduled date, and with that money I bought a plane ticket. I had spent 62 years of my life living for someone else. Now, for the first time, I had the freedom and the resources to live for myself. I sold my small apartment and bought a small house in a quiet coastal town 3 hours away. A house with 2 bedrooms and a small yard where I could plant a garden. It cost $40,000, which I paid for in cash. The day I signed the papers, I felt reborn. This house was mine, purchased not with the currency of sacrifice, but with the currency of justice. One last time, after the final payment was made, Julian called. And this time, I answered. His voice was smaller, humbled. He asked if we could ever talk, if there was any chance for reconciliation. I listened, and then I spoke the words I had been preparing for months. The son I raised, I told him, either never truly existed or he died somewhere along the way. He was replaced by a stranger I do not know and do not wish to know. I wish you peace in your life, Julian, but that peace will have to be found far away from me. I have closed this door, not out of hatred, but out of love for myself. There was a long silence, and then a sound that might have been a sob, before he hung up. That was the last time we ever spoke. Now, I live in my small house by the sea. I wake up not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of seagulls. I spend my mornings in my garden, my hands in the rich soil, coaxing flowers to life. There is a peace in this simple existence that I never found in all my years of striving and sacrificing. I have learned that true love must begin with oneself. I have learned that setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation. My victory was not in the money I recovered. It was in the fact that I recovered myself. I learned that saying no is a sacred right, that protecting your peace is not selfishness, but wisdom. I live each day now as a testament to that lesson. I close the door on my son not for revenge, but for my own dignity, and that distinction I have learned makes all the difference in the world. I won, not by becoming his enemy, but by finally and forever refusing to be my own victim.